The United States will be moving troops into eastern Syria to help defend the region's oil fields from Islamic State. Now, that's according to U.S. defense officials. The announcement comes after the decision by President Trump earlier this month to pull American troops out of Syria. That move paved the way for Turkey's assault on Kurdish forces who had been a close American ally. A ceasefire deal brokered by the U.S. has allowed Turkey to establish a so-called safe zone along its border with Syria, which it is now patrolling along with Russian troops. Well, here's how Mideast analyst Markus Bickel described the situation in the region in an interview with me earlier.
They are there to protect the oil fields from being attacked by the Islamic State again, together with the Kurds. So you have a Kurdish-American small alliance still on the ground, but the major trend is America is not only leaving Syria, but is giving up the Middle East as the whole region to Russia as the new major power in the region.
So is Russia's influence in Syria set to increase yet further? And how should the international community respond to Russia's partnership there with a NATO member, Turkey? Those are just some of the questions being discussed by NATO ministers during a second day of talks in Brussels.
Moscow is the new puppet master in Syria. Russia's defense minister talks with the head of a Kurdish militia there, and it's clear who's giving the orders. That's the reality facing NATO defence ministers. They're scrambling to catch up with the political reality of post-war Syria and, more to the point, the West's role there.
There are different views, and the allies have stated in the meeting also views which are publicly known. It was a strong support for a political solution and a strong support for the stronger international engagement.
German Defence Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer proposed an international force to police a secure zone, but she only had a few details. For a moment, it looked like US Defence Secretary Mark Esper might support her idea.
I think it's fine because it's something that we've been calling on our European partners to do for quite some time, is to step up and do more. So I would be supportive of that. Okay. Supportive politically. We don't intend on contributing ground forces or anything to that operation.
The Europeans had questions about the details and the timing.
We are not against an international security zone in principle, but the situation on the ground has changed now that Turkey and Russia have reached an agreement.
In the past, the Germans have often been slow to suggest involvement in such matters. But the foreign minister said she had proposed it to the Turks.
They showed themselves as very open in our bilateral talk. This could take place with the involvement of the international community, and Turkey would be open to talks about that.
But when talking to the larger group of ministers, she'd only offered a couple of sentences on her idea, sources said. She said that was enough.
The discussion process has been kicked off. It'll be a long process and a difficult one, but the first steps were very encouraging.
Germany's defence minister is still looking for support in Brussels, but NATO allies Turkey and the US are pulling in different directions.
Well, are the two pulling hard enough to crack NATO? For more on that, we're joined by Bente, Scheller, the heads of the Mideast section at the Heinrich Boll Foundation. It's a think tank close to the German Green Party. Good morning. Thanks so much for coming in. We have high-level talks going on in Brussels today at NATO. Is NATO facing a threat to its future, not from external enemies, but from alliance members?
Well, indeed, I think NATO has never faced a more difficult challenge. Now, with the one major partner of NATO, one major member being so much at odds with the other, I don't think we've ever witnessed a situation like that before.
Okay, it's hard to find a disagreement like this between Turkey and the United States, but could it be that they're actually working together, that they have agreed with Russia to create this safe zone for the resettlement of hundreds of thousands of Syrians?
Possibly so. It is just that if you look ahead, what should that alliance then, this deal, what should it consist in? Because in the end, they are not looking into the same direction. They have different interests. And whatever deal should that be that includes all of these interests?
Okay, the German government has indicated it wants to see some type of international troop presence. Do you think that has any chance at all?
I don't see this coming because the situation is very complicated. As you mentioned, we have NATO partners looking into different directions, and Germany is not really willing to do anything out of NATO, and also it would not be fathomable to do anything outside that framework. So this idea that has been floated will be very difficult to implement. Also, it was not really spelled out. How should that work? In cooperation with Russia and Turkey was what the German defense minister said, but these are exactly the parties that are bombarding northern Syria, one in the west, one in the east. So how can you cooperate with these two violating international law?
Okay, now the United States President Donald Trump said that American troops would be pulling out of Syria. Now it appears they'll be redeploying to the Conoco gas plant that's near Deir ez-Zor, and they'll be teaming up with Kurdish forces there. What do you make of that?
Well, that's the most bizarre maneuver because, as you learned over the past days, Kurdish politicians have come closer to the regime in Damascus, and then the cooperation with Kurdish troops that are at the same time affiliated with Damascus, that is not something that will work. It doesn't have a perspective to really work out because both are not on the same page regarding the future of Syria and regarding what is possible to protect. So this move to remain in Deir ez-Zor, which is not anywhere close to a border, how are the US going to protect their troops, and who do they need to co-opt to be able to do that?
Okay, those are some good questions that America will be looking at. Russia and Turkey have created this resettlement zone. They're calling it a safety zone, but it's in effect a resettlement zone for Syrian refugees now living in Turkey. While NATO and the West have been looking on inactive, we have the NATO meeting today looking at this. Who knows if they'll come up with something on it, but the resettlement that's being planned by Turkey is a massive violation of international law and human rights conventions that Turkey has signed off to.
Indeed, it is. And it comes at the price of ethnic cleansing also in the north. You have seen 180,000 people fleeing already from the Kurdish areas further to the east. These people will not be able to return, and especially not if resettlement is taking place by Turkey forcing Arab Syrian refugees out of Turkey into that zone. So we see different levels of violations of international humanitarian law, and that, of course, is unacceptable.
Do you see NATO becoming a spectator to this ethnic cleansing, as you described it?
NATO has been a spectator to the whole conflict in Syria. It is not the first time that major human rights violations take place. So at the moment, it has maneuvered itself in a very difficult position, how to intervene at this stage of the conflict.
Bente Scheller from the Heinrich Boll Foundation, thanks so very much for coming in.
Thank you.